All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. I got the recording going. I forgot my earpiece, so for all people listening to this online afterwards, I hope this sounds okay. Actually, you know what? I'll turn it this way so that way I know the mic will pick up. All right, cool. So, guys, welcome to Unapologetic Week, whatever it is at this point. The TV doesn't reflect the stuff very easily, at least on this. Hopefully it gets better as we go. So last week we talked about the argument for morality, and then this week we're going to talk about the argument for meaning. They're very similar in argumentation and is best used together. So best to use these arguments together. And also I'm going to try to get us out a little early because I'm preaching this morning as well. Pastor John got a positive test. He says he just has a light cough, but he wanted to be safe, so that's fine. So anyway, we will go ahead and move forward. So the argument for meaning. Now, I oftentimes will say if I'm doing a real quick presentation on Christianity, like, hey, what does Christianity offer that other religions don't? I've actually done a sermon here where I talked about origin, morality, meaning, destiny, and identity. And that's my quick overview of that without getting into New Testament proofs and stuff. So this is meaning. This is another powerful one to use. So the argument goes like this. Premise one, if there is no God, then there is no objective meaning. There is objective meaning, therefore God exists. So what I mean by this is meaning in life, right? So how many of you guys would say your life has meaning? Right. You could probably start, if I asked you, can you flesh that out for me? You'll probably start talking about your family, your friends, maybe your purpose at a nonprofit, maybe at work. You have various things that help give you a purpose, but I'm sure you know that your meaning is separate from those things, right? There's something transcendental to you because we're Christians, so we acknowledge that we're made in the image of God. So I want to talk about the necessity of God and immortality is what that says there. Again, it's crisp as anything on my iPad, and then on here it gets a little fuzzy, so that's cool. Adjust course for future reference. All right, or maybe this is my ploy to get you close to the TV, right? Just kidding.
You're sitting on your lap, sure.
So the necessity of God. Mankind is the only one to ask questions like why. Why am I here and where am I going? When was the last time you had your dog ask such a question?
My dog asked that.
What?
I don't know dog language.
What?
Mine says, "Where's my dinner?"
Exactly. They're very, very simple creatures. I much often wish I could be one sometimes because I'm like sleep and food and play. That sounds awesome. But anyway. The other part, so all other creatures, though, have instincts to guide them devoid of such questions, right? Animals, when they're born, they just do. And it's actually really kind of cool, and it's a kind of a mystery. They call them instincts. Why is it that birds, after they have, baby birds down in the south, can fly back north and go right where their nesting was of their parents? That makes no sense. It's just crazy stuff, things that we can't explain. But ever since the Enlightenment, mankind has shrugged off God and has been troubled by these very questions. So, Dr. William Lane Craig said this: "You are the accidental byproduct of nature, a result of matter plus time plus chance. There is no reason for your existence. All you face is death." This here is the logical conclusion of someone who doesn't believe in God. That all you face is death, a meaningless existence, and then you just die. Is that not depressing? Yeah, think about that. Like, your dog has no objective meaning, and one day Fido's going to get buried in your backyard probably. And that's just the reality.
Not a Fido.
So it's sad, but it's true that the fact that there is no God, then that's all that's waiting for us is death. William Lane Craig also said this: "Modern man thought that when he had gotten rid of God, he had freed himself from all that repressed and stifled him. Instead, he discovered that in killing God, he has also killed himself. For if there is no God, then man's life becomes absurd." Okay? So, this is the harsh reality of it. So without God and immortality, all that awaits mankind is death, and mankind was but a spark that began and ceased with no purpose and no meaning. So, and this is one of the things I talk about all the time, we wonder why depression and suicide rates keep climbing in our schools. Meanwhile, we keep telling our kids that you're a space accident and nobody really cares about you and you have no objective purpose, no objective meaning, nothing truly loves you. Well, yeah, no wonder why kids are like, well, what's the point, right? That's why the argument for meaning actually is also powerful. That and morality hits people where they live, okay? So you can get it very scientific all day long, and that can be helpful for an engineer, but this sort of argument helps the normal person, okay? The regular human beings. Jean-Paul Sartre, or whatever, I don't speak French, said several hours or several years makes no difference once you have lost eternity. So in other words, the person that you are will cease to exist. So you, here in this room, will cease to exist. And you will no longer be. So, and here's what's funny, is that if you talk to people about this, and you talk about death in general, many people will accept the death of others. Yeah, we all die one day. But then once you start talking about them, suddenly it becomes real. Right? It's kind of like that whole, if I spun a story talking about World War II and how many millions died in the internment camps, you go, wow, yep, and it becomes a number, right?
Yep.
But if I told the story of one girl who went through all these horrible tragedies and in the end died in a camp, you guys would feel much more of a gut punch, wouldn't you? So the whole point of that is that's exactly what this is making it personal to somebody. What gives you meaning? So, the harsh reality continued is this. Scientists have stated that our universe that we exist in today is expanding. Energy is being separated, making it colder and colder until all energy is used up, right? Your energy, you wind it up tight and it eventually runs out. So what happens with your body, right? When you die eventually, that's why some of us don't look as good as we used to, right? Hey, sorry, too personal. Time out. But energy is being separated, right, on all that. So also stars will burn up and all matter will collapse into black holes and dead stars. Are you guys came to church today? This is feeling very void and death and destruction and nihilistic. But not only is mankind doomed, but so is the universe doomed to an eternally cold and dark existence. This is your reality if God does not exist. And what's funny is how I have talked to atheists. I'm like, well, there's no meaning. And once in a while, they're like, no, we have objective meaning. I have I've created objectives for myself, and my family is my meaning, and this is my meaning. I don't need God to give me meaning. I'm like, then you're just creating your own illusion, because in the end, you guys are just all going to end up in black holes, and it's going to be all for naught anyway.
Wouldn't that just all be subjective at that point then?
I mean, yeah, well, then I could say my meaning then, my subjective meaning that I created for myself is I have to punt a midget once a day. Come here, Micah. No, I'm just kidding. But you could, I mean, as silly as that is, right? That's ridiculous. But the point is that you could, right? In an atheistic worldview, if it's all becomes subjective, because again, remember our material and immaterial, if we don't have access to the immaterial worlds because we live only in a material world, then I create my own subjectivism. I have no objectivism. And remember, objectivism means true for everybody. Subjectivism means different for everybody, okay? So I can create my own subjective meaning, and if I want to go punt people, I can punt people. So...
Is this where we get to stand up and hit you?
Yeah, probably, subjectively. But I'm going to say that objectively you can't. I'm going to run out that door now.
I would.
Ejection handle.
This is what happens when you make fun of midgets.
Micah, do you feel attacked?
No.
You don't feel attacked?
No.
For those all listening online, Micah is very short. He's like 3'2". So,
Hey, watch it. It's covered on both sides.
so glad. Yeah, that's true. You guys got like a pincer movement going on here. So, I'm glad my wife's not here too. Anyway. So, So Dr. William Lane Craig also said this, on the rails. If there is no God and there is no immortality, And what is the consequence of this? It means that life itself is absurd. It means that the life we have is without ultimate significance, value, or purpose. So, no ultimate meaning. If a person just lives to die, what person did their existence serve? What ultimate significance? None, right? Scientists have believed that the universe started with a Big Bang 13 billion years ago. If the universe never began, what difference does it make if it only got destroyed anyway? Right? So, really, if there's no God, the universe beginning really doesn't matter, right? And also, then what difference is it when the universe collapses in on itself? There really isn't one. It might be a little inconvenient, but there's really no objective, true for all purpose for everybody. In fact, a nihilist or someone who's suicidal might find that relieving, right? So who was right? Who's wrong? Even if mankind was immortal, without God, there is no purpose for that immortality even. So even if we live forever, there's really no reason for it, right? If God's not true. Here's a great fun example. So we have an astronaut chilling on the moon, drinking a beer. I don't know how he's doing that with a helmet on, but it's cool, whatever. So here he is. So it's a marooned life. So we have this. An astronaut was marooned on a barren chunk of rock, lost in outer space. He had with him 2 vials, one containing poison and the other a potion that would make him live forever. Realizing his predicament, he gulped down the poison. But then, to his horror, he discovered that he had swallowed the wrong vial. He had drunk the potion of immortality, and that meant that he was cursed to exist forever, a meaningless and unending life floating in space.
He accidentally blue-pilled himself.
He accidentally blue-pilled himself. Yes, he did. But can you guys see the purposelessness of this? Okay? I don't think you need to be a really intense philosopher to understand what I'm getting at here. That's why, actually, what I'm purposely doing is starting this class out with very simple arguments for God's existence, because these are the ones that are going to affect you the most. So, because sometimes it can get very convoluted, like if we get into the ontological argument, that one's confusing for people. You have to, really stretch your brain. It makes sense, but it's also a stretch, you're like...
So what do atheists say is the meaning of what?
They literally have no answer.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a famous pro-atheist, atheist advocate named Richard Dawkins, who literally says there is no meaning to life, that life is meaningless, and he's trying to go around convincing other people of that.
Yeah. So a lot of times
his meaning is to convince other people that life is meaningless.
There's pretty much 2 answers. They'll accept that there is no meaning, so you just make the best fit what you can while you can. And the others will say that you can create objective meaning, but it's through your own subjectivity that you create objectivism, which
Doesn't make any sense.
really doesn't make sense. It is. Yeah, it's like, objectively it's true that my family gives me purpose, but that's your subjective feelings. Yeah, I'm not saying that that's what should give you meaning, that's what gives me meaning. And then Micah could go, well, what if my meaning of life is punting giants? So, you see, it gets very confusing.
Yeah, but what do regular people, instead of the scholarly, say there's no meaning? I mean, there's a lot of people at Starbucks and Big B sitting there not believing in God. What are they thinking about it? What?
The objectives, though, that's what they'll say. Well, my family gives me a purpose. That, a lot of normal people will say things like, "Oh, my family" or "my friends." That's what normal people kind of hit at, and then you have to kind of, I understand that you think that they give you purpose, but why is that important? And why, if this universe collapses in on itself, what good did you do? You kind of have to start digging at their foundation and show them that they're assuming that that's a good thing. You have to show them that what they're assuming to be good also requires God. Because otherwise, like we talked last week about morality, what's right and what's wrong in life, that's the same thing where it's like, well, okay, you're saying that's good, but who makes what good? Who measures good and who measures meaning? So when you start hitting them with that, and that's usually when I say I can get people who are atheists kind of on a rat wheel, because then they start clawing, trying because these are just questions they never thought. Because it's funny, we are created in the image of God, and we have that law written on our hearts, and we kind of assume that those things are just true, which they are, but they don't have justification for those, if that makes sense. So it is, that's one of the things that if I run into somebody I had a kid that came to church, his name was Nick, and Him and I got lunch a few times. He was agnostic, but he came to church because he liked a girl that he worked with that went to our church. And of course, I got lunch with him. And it was funny because I was like, so why don't you believe in God? And he started talking about how he's not sure and how, he got very convoluted. How can we know anything's true? So then I asked him, how does he know it's true that what he doesn't know is real? And he's like, I never thought. Well, I'm like, how do you know that you don't know? If knowledge is unknown.
Know everything. Right?
Yeah. And then I started getting at morality. He's like, well, isn't that just like a collective thing that we've all agreed upon? I'm like, yeah, but what about Nazi Germany? And then you can finally see that those things were connecting. And now he's like, yeah, I totally see. Like, and then he started like weeks after going, wow, religion's good. This is a good thing. I'm like, yeah, you're getting there. You're getting there. He's still getting there. But I wouldn't say he's anchored in his faith, but I think he's a little budding bit, if that makes sense.
So really, the culture and the movement away from God can come down to people just aren't thinking deep enough.
Sometimes.
If they would think deep enough, they couldn't justify what they're thinking.
Sometimes that's what it is. I think there's that, and I think there's also, so part of that, we're not teaching kids how to think, we're teaching them what to think, right?
Exactly.
So we don't teach people how to think, that we teach them what to think. So yes, but I think the other part is that because if you acknowledge, for example, that there's objective morality, then you have to acknowledge the fact that there are things I can't do, and people would rather not. So I think it's both intellectual and I think it's also emotional, because if I want to hook up with girls while I'm at college and just play around, well, I don't want to acknowledge God, right? So that's emotional. That's a feelings based. But then there's other people who haven't thought deep enough to understand it. So I think it's both. Does that make sense? Like, I think it's so, but usually if we can get people to think, in my experience, if I get people to think straight, I can get them to start coming in my direction, because our brain controls the ship in a lot of ways. Now you might have feelings, but your brain oftentimes can be like, okay, I'm not feeling the right thing there. I need to correct course. And that's why also I think the moral argument and meaning argument is good, because it both appeals to logic and emotion. Because meaninglessness, nobody wants a purposeless life. So you're hitting their emotional, but then also you're going, but there's no logical thing either. So it kind of hits both. That's why I like moral and meaning, because both of these, I don't know maybe what makes the person tick, but I can usually hit both with these. If that makes sense. If the person gets super scientific, then I'll shift to maybe the kalam, but anyway. So life just becomes an endless amount of time-wasting activities to pass the decades until we die. How many of you guys know the band My Chemical Romance? No? Okay. Super punk band. Okay. They have a lyric that says, we're just all waiting for it's just a lifelong wait for a hospital stay, is one of their very nihilistic songs. But thus, if there is no God, then life itself, not God, woohoo, almost spoke heresy. All right. Thus, if there is no God, then life itself becomes meaningless. Man and the universe are without purpose. So, you guys might remember I did a comparison similar to this last week with Mother Teresa and Hitler. Well, now we have Stalin and the Lamb at the Library of Congress, a saint. No value without immortality or God. We have no value. We have no purpose. So if there is no God, there's a typo. If there is no God, there is no ultimate difference between living like a tyrant or living like a saint. There's no difference. I mean, after all, you live in a purposeless universe. Who cares? Make the most of it however you want to. Dostoevsky said, if there is no immortality, then all things are permitted. After all, life is too short to jeopardize it by acting out of anything but self-interest. Right? So if there's no immortality and we do not live forever, then all things are purposefulness. Anyway, so Kai Nielsen said this. He's an atheistic philosopher, okay? We have not been able to show that reason requires the moral point of view, or that all really rational persons, unhoodwinked by myth or ideology, need not be individual egoists or classical amoralists. Reason doesn't decide here. The picture I have painted for you is not a pleasant one. Reflection on it depresses me. Pure practical reason, even with a good knowledge of the facts, will not take you to morality. So, no value, no morality. Okay? Absurdity of life without God. No God means no immortality, no objective value, and thus no objective morality. Moral values become either statements of preference or the byproduct of evolutionary development. Okay? Can you see how this can be effective, by the way, on somebody? When you really decide to start kind of picking at the foundation?
I think what we get hung up on is we live in a society where it's all about, we're talking about what's our purpose in life. Our purpose in life all comes down to self.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
self-promoting, self-fulfilling. I compare myself to all these other people and try to get on the scale, and that's who we worship.
Yeah.
That becomes the God.
Well, it's because we live in an individualistic society.
Right. And so something has to replace God.
I was talking yesterday to a Muslim, actually, in my office. And he was talking about how the family takes care of each other and how communal they are and how they have purpose there. And he's like, America could learn from that. And I was like, oh, gut punch. He's not wrong. We live in such... And I'm not saying that individualism is always bad, right? You are responsible for you. We're going to talk about that this morning in the sermon. But we have individually, we're responsible for a collective, not for us to just be caring about ourselves. We have made ourselves gods.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So atheism leads to nihilism. When I say nihilism, does everyone know what I mean? No. Nihilism is the idea that nothing has purpose. It's all an aimless void. It's a very depressing outlook. And it's actually a literal philosophical position. I've had conversations with nihilists. They'll be like, oh, no, I'm a nihilist. And I'm like, oh, great. You and I are completely on opposite ends of this philosophical...
They're
Yeah.
the anarchists of philosophy.
They are the anarchists of philosophy. That was really well put. I like you. Stick around. All right. So nihilism.
Nothing's real.
Life is meaningless. Knowledge is impossible. Yep. So nothing's real and existence is pointless. So if death stands with its arms wide open at the end of life, then what is the goal of life? Is everything just pointless? If there is no God, this is the natural conclusion. So mankind will eventually just peer out, lost in oblivion of an indifferent universe. So here's a chart, atheism and theism. So atheism, no difference between you and a dog, worm, or germ. Theism says all the difference between you and a dog, a worm, or a germ. Atheism says there's no purpose whatsoever. Theism says you're created for a specific purpose. Atheism says that all that awaits is death and void. Well, theism says what waits ahead is either eternal death or eternal life. Atheism says there is no hope, and then theism says there is hope for man. Now you tell me, even if, let's say God doesn't exist, okay? Let's say it doesn't. If you were to believe something, and you have no real reason to believe something besides just what seems better for you, which one of these seems like would be a better... Yeah, theism. That's where Pascal's wager comes in. Exactly. I'd rather live my whole life like there is a God, and in the end find out I'm wrong, than to live my entire life like there isn't a God, and in the end find out I'm wrong. Okay? So, are you willing, if you're not a believer, and I'll ask somebody this, are you willing to pay the philosophical price tag of atheism? Mm-hmm. Are you willing to pay that price? Most of the time, they will not. Once in a while, you get somebody who admit it. And at that point, you just got to call it out. Be like, okay, well, if you're okay with subjective morality, subjective meaning, you're complete anarchy, and everyone can do whatever they want. It's the Purge movies over and over again. If you're okay with that, and you think I'm the one who's intellectually and morally bankrupt, I really got not much else to say here. You know, the facts speak for themselves. Then sometimes you can't argue somebody or debate somebody into, actually, generally speaking, you're not going to be able to. But this is really helpful for people who are searching or on the fence. Somebody has already put their foot down. They've actually done surveys that if you could prove, and they've asked, if we could prove without a shadow of a doubt that Christianity was true, would you be a Christian? Like 80% of atheists said no. So it tells you that it's not about facts as much as they say that they're the free thinkers and they care about science and facts.
Individualism at that point.
Yeah, it's just,
They
I don't want to acknowledge that there is a God because I want to do whatever I want. I will not be held responsible by somebody. It's almost like an authority problem. It's like the angsty teenager. So, if God is dead, man is dead too. What? I heard somebody.
C.S. Lewis said that hell is spending eternity with yourself. I mean, that's a condensed version of it. All the things that make you nuts in life, you're going to spend eternity with that.
That's a good way to put that. Hell is an
I mean, it
eternity
takes
with yourself.
paragraphs. I just condensed down paragraphs, but if you want to read the whole thing, I can direct you to it.
Yes.
You get stuck with yourself, so you're stuck with it.
C.S. Lewis is actually a great place to start. Mere Christianity is awesome. Like, it's a small book, but it's fantastic. So if God is dead, man is dead too. So the practical impossibility of an atheistic world. Okay, let's just talk about this for a minute. Practical impossibility to atheism. The only solution the atheist can offer is that we face the absurdity of life bravely. I'm going to say that again. The only solution the atheist can offer is that we face the absurdity of life bravely. Can anyone already see the logical fallacy in this? Because this is what they will say.
It's so ironic, it's painful.
So, Bertrand Russell, the atheist, said this. We must build our lives upon, quote, the firm foundation of unyielding despair. Camus said that we should honestly recognize life's absurdity and then live in love for one another. Let me ask you guys, can you see the logical fallacy in here? Notice that they're appealing to something that they have no access to. Remember, material versus immaterial?
We cannot love.
Bravely is an immaterial thing. Loving one another is an immaterial thing. If everything is in the material world, you don't have access to the immaterial. And that's my favorite thing to pull the rug out right from underneath them. And they will actually, and I'm telling you, I have used this in evangelistic techniques, and it has worked. It has helped. I've led people to the Lord with this. I've also irritated people with this. Let the pieces fall where they may, okay? Remember, pebble in the shoe. We talked about that in week 2, week 1, something like that. Pebble in the shoe. What is the difference? What is the problem with this? As I mentioned before, the problem is that it is impossible to live consistently and happily with such a worldview. If one lives consistently, he will not be happy. And if one lives happily, it is only because he is not consistent.
There you go.
It is one big logical contradiction. Also, who says love or happiness is objectively good in such a world? What if I think, because if I'm telling you, if God doesn't exist, what if I just want to be a tyrant and live as comfortably as possible? At that point, Stalin becomes my hero, right? Like, oh yeah, make everyone else suffer so I can live the best. Who cares? So, again, I've drawn this chart a few times. Here it is up here. Atheism only has time, space, and matter. And time, you could even argue in atheism, is just a philosophical concept of sequence of events, right? But whatever, we will give them time, all right? We'll say that we'll go with sequence of time there, sequence of events. Theism has values, morality, and purpose, and also has access to time, space, and matter.
Yeah.
So, if you believe in God, you have this, the two-story dilemma right there. So, as we continue, the success of biblical Christianity. So, according to the Christian worldview, God does exist, and a man's life does not end at the grave. I have grace. Does not end at the grave. In the resurrection body, man may enjoy eternal life, right? Mm-hmm. So we have a hope, we have a purpose, we have a creative purpose, we have morality. Christianity offers both immortality and a relationship with God. Because immortality, again, even if God was real, but you don't have immortality, your life still is purposeless because there's no ultimate judgment. There's nothing to look forward to. God might exist, but you still cease to exist. Does that make sense? So, all right. So Pascal again says we have nothing to lose and infinity to gain. So the question is, at this point, is what would stop somebody ever for jumping into this? Usually it's because they have various things like, well, I don't want to worship a God who lets so much suffering into the world, things like that, which we're going to approach the problem of evil in this class. Mm-hmm. That's going to be, I would like to say, I would want to make that almost 3 weeks, just to make sure there's different layers to it we want to address as we go. Biggest thing was probably what we said last week, is that even if you say there's evil in the world and suffering in the world, you're still saying it's objectively bad, so you have to have something to measure it by. And then you are also still believing that God could create free creatures without also the ability to do evil. Mm-hmm. So, otherwise God creates robots, right? That can't do and be free.